Imagine a single book that changed the way the world thought about empire and culture. That book was Orientalism, published in 1978, and its author was Edward Said. Born in 1935 in Mandatory Palestine, Said later moved to the United States and became a professor of literature at Columbia University. He is now remembered as one of the founding figures of post-colonial studies. Pause here and note this down. Orientalism has been asked in exam. In it, Said applied Michel Foucault's idea of discourse, not Roland Barthes' idea of the death of the author, asked in exam. That's a classic UGC NET trap, so be careful. Said showed how the West had historically represented the East, the so-called Orient, as exotic, backward, and inferior. This wasn't just scholarship. It was a cultural discourse that justified imperial power. In short, literature, travel writing, and even academic study became complicit in sustaining colonial domination. Now here's something you'll love. Said didn't stop at exposing the problem. He also developed a method called contrapuntal reading, one asked in exam. Think of it like listening to multiple musical notes at once. Contrapuntal reading means analyzing Western canonical texts like Jane Austen or Joseph Conrad with an ear for their colonial entanglements. In doing so, we recover the silenced voices of the colonized. It reminds us that the colonizer and the colonized are interconnected, their stories woven together. Can you recall where Said's intellectual journey began? It started with his early work, Joseph Conrad and the Fiction of Autobiography in 1966, where he first explored the politics of representation. His beginnings, Intention and Method in 1974 engaged thinkers like Nietzsche, Saussure, and Foucault, laying the foundation for his later, more politically charged works. Beyond Orientalism, his major writings include The World, The Text, and The Critic in 1983, Nationalism, Colonialism and Literature, Yeats and Decolonization in 1988, and Culture and Imperialism in 1993. Pause here, two more to remember for exams. On Late Style, published in 2006, was asked in exam, and Humanism and Democratic Criticism in 2004 captured his final reflections. And don't forget, Said was not just a theorist, he was also a public intellectual, a strong advocate for Palestinian rights, and a voice calling for justice and equality. E. San Juan Jr. once described him as the originator and inspiring patron saint of postcolonial theory and discourse. And for UGC NET, that's exactly how you should remember Edward Said, the thinker who showed us how representation, culture, and power are always bound together. Imagine standing in a library where every book written about Asia, the Middle East, or North Africa has been authored by Western scholars. How accurate would those portrayals be? This is the question Edward Said asks in his landmark work Orientalism, published in 1978. And pause here, remember this title carefully because it was asked in exam. Said introduced Orientalism not just as a field of study but as a critical concept. He defined it famously as a Western style for dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient. Yes, this exact definition was asked in exam. For Said, Orientalism wasn't an innocent academic pursuit, it was a political tool that supported imperial control. Pause and note this, Orientalism operated on three levels. First, it was an academic field where Western scholars studied the Orient. Second, it was a style of thought built upon the sharp distinction between the Orient and the Occident. This phrase too was asked in exam. And third, it worked as a political instrument, exaggerating differences, stereotyping societies, and justifying Western superiority. Can you recall one of the examples Said used? He analyzed colonial literature, including the works of Joseph Conrad. He showed how entire peoples and cultures were collapsed into exotic images of adventure, decadence, or danger. Said even pointed out how Arab elites themselves internalized Western-made, romanticized versions of their own culture. In this way, Orientalism shaped not just how the West saw the East, but also how the East sometimes saw itself. Of course, not everyone agreed. Historians like Bernard Lewis criticized Said for being anti-Western. Some said his definition of Orientalism was too broad, mixing up profession, thought, and political power. But despite these debates, the influence of Said's book is undeniable. Later, he refined his arguments in the afterword of 1995 and again in the preface of 2003. Together with his later book Culture and Imperialism from 1993, Orientalism became the foundation of post-colonial studies.